we talked about kinematics. We talked about osteokinematics, which is the movement of bone segments in relationship to each other. And now we're going to talk about arthrokinematics. So osteo means bone, arthro means joint. So now we're talking about the movement of joint surfaces relative to one another. And that is the essence of our extremity movement. We need to know how those joints are working together. It's the essence of a lot of the movements in our body. So arthrokinematics, by definition, is the motion occurring between joint articular surfaces. So most joints in the body have a convex-concave joint relationship, meaning one side of the joint, one bone surface, is convex, and the other side that it articulates with is concave. And the idea of this convex-concave relationship is it improves fit and stability of the joint, and it properly guides the joint motion. So in the picture, we have a sort of a cross-section side view of the elbow joint, or the humero-ulnar joint, where the trochlea of the humerus is convex, and it articulates with the concave trochlear notch of the ulna. So the fundamental movements of arthrokinematics vary depending on whether the concave articular surface is moving on a fixed convex or the convex is moving on a fixed concave. So it's sort of the joint version of that open chain, closed chain thing. You're going to get different joint movements, joint surface movements, depending on which side is moving. So we're going to define three different fundamental movements between joint surfaces. And the three different movements are roll, slide, and spin. So roll is where multiple points along one rotating articular surface contact multiple points on another articular surface. So the analogy is a tire rotating across a stretch of pavement. So every different point on the tire touches a different point on the pavement as it rolls along. Okay, and that happens with joint surfaces too. When you have roll, different points on the convex surface are contacting different points on the concave surface. Slide, on the other hand, is where a single point on one articular surface contacts multiple points on another articular surface. And back to our tire analogy, it's where you've locked up the brakes and now your stationary tire is skidding across a stretch of icy pavement. So one point on the tire is going across multiple points on the pavement. Okay? So roll is multiple points to multiple points. Slide is one point to multiple points. And spin is where a single point on one surface rotates on a single point on another surface. So the analogy is the rotating toy top spinning on one spot on the floor. And so you have one single point rotating on another single point. Okay, so that's spin. Roll, slide, and spin. Those are our three fundamental movement between joint surfaces. There are rules that govern roll and slide mechanics. So those roll and slide motions follow specific rules, and it depends on whether convex is moving on concave or concave is moving on convex. So right now, at this point in kinesiology, we're saying, well, yeah, who cares? Or why do we care, I guess? Maybe not who cares. We know who cares, but why do we care? And the reason that we care about this is going to come up later on when we're studying joint mobilizations. We're trying to mobilize a joint to get a better, more functional movement. We need to know which ways it's going to roll and which ways it's going to slide. So when we're in the lab in April and in May and in June, we're going to have bony models, and we're going to practice these convex on concave movements, and we're going to see what happens. But right now we're just going to define it, and it may or may not make any sense. If you have a convex-concave surface around your house, you can kind of experiment. If you don't, well, you can always make one, but anyway, store this little nut away, and then when we get into the lab, we'll go through it again, and hopefully it'll make sense to you then. But rule number one is when a convex surface is moving on a concave surface. So an example would be like the knee, the femur articulates with the tibia. The tibia is concave, the femur is convex. So if we're doing a closed chain knee extension, it's convex moving on concave. When a convex joint surface moves on a concave joint surface, the roll and slide occur in opposite directions. And the reason for this is we want to maintain joint congruency. We don't want to just roll off the joint. We want to maintain that joint congruency. Rule number 2 is when the concave moves on convex, the roll and slide occur in the same direction, and it's the same thing. It's to improve joint congruency. So if you want to try to memorize those by rote memorization, you can. You can write them down. You can think about them. But when it's going to make more sense is when we get into the lab with the bony models and we get to practice them. So here's sort of an example. When the book likes to say functional considerations, meaning how does this work in the human body? So the roll and slide in opposite directions maintains articular stability. We want to maintain a firm surface contact so the joint stays congruent. So roll and slide in opposite directions maintains the stability. Its spin always occurs around the central longitudinal axis, so stability isn't as much of an issue in spin. If you have something like impingement syndrome that doesn't allow roll or slide, motion might be hindered. So you might have some issues with motion if you have impingement syndrome. And that's what this picture is talking about in the book. So this one is really difficult to talk about in lecture. It's more of a lab subject, but I just want to introduce it in lecture so your brain is softened up and ready for that information in lab.